This is the new reality. Let's stop pretending there is some sort of milestone that is out in the future that's going to solve all this. And let's get strategic and let's get intentional about how we're going to work.
You talk frequently and openly on your social media and in your books about your own struggle with anxiety and panic disorders. And I don't mean to put you on the spot for that, but is there anything you would follow up with that would help our audience of millions of people around the world that perhaps have a colleague or a spouse or their boss or an employee, child that perhaps is facing some of those issues, or they themselves as well, that would maybe give everybody a light and some inspiration this morning?
Yeah, of course. So I would tackle it in two different ways. I'd tackle it in two different ways when you're dealing with somebody at work, especially if you're the manager or the leader at work, and somebody in your personal life. And the reason why I say that is because I think it's really important to be compassionate and understanding and supportive of, everybody in your life. But I'm not out to turn leaders and managers or anybody into a therapist. Because the fact of the matter is, when somebody's struggling, whether they're struggling with anxiety or depression, or they're struggling with issues related to trauma or PTSD, or heck, they're just struggling because we're still living through a global pandemic, and every single human being's nervous system right now has been switched into a state of fight or flight. And so, everybody, after 2 years of this, Scott, is living in a condition in their bodies that human beings are not designed to live in. We all feel emotionally taxed. We all feel the fatigue from being on Zoom conference calls all day long. We all feel the giant, are you kidding me? As we see the virus continue to mutate and closings and this and that. And so at this moment, what leaders need to know is your team is emotionally, physically, and spiritually gassed. What they need from you is they need more appreciation. They need to be given a little bit more trust. And what I'm going to say about that, and I've been hammering this in speeches. I've been hammering this because I believe that every single company had the exact same response when the pandemic hit. And it is a very typical response because it's a response that tracks to the normal anxiety response. So as we unpack anxiety, Scott, I'm going to talk about a bunch of different things, but I promise we will end up in a place where there's lots of takeaway. So anxiety, first and foremost, everybody, it's a very important thing to have in life. Yes, you heard Mel Robbins say that. Anxiety is really important because all that anxiety is anxiety is an internal alarm system that is hardwired in your nervous system. And that alarm system has one job. The alarm system called anxiety has the job of making you pay attention. That's it. There is some kind of threat, some kind of uncertainty. When anxiety races through your body, you come alive and you go into a state of hyperfocus. Your nervous system switches into your sympathetic nervous system. You immediately go on edge. Your spidey senses come up. Your prefrontal cortex engages. Your heart starts to race. All of this, by the way, tied to evolution to keep you safe. Anxiety is a good thing when there is an actual threat.
Yeah.
So, for example, let's say, Scott, that you and I are driving down the road and we're chatting up a storm and we're driving, to go do a speech or whatever. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a semi truck cuts right into our lane and you have to swerve, right, to get out of the way. As that semi truck, Scott, cuts into our lane, what do you feel in your body?
A rush of adrenaline, fear for my life. I need to take immediate control over my safety because that driver doesn't know I'm alive or he wouldn't have cut in my lane.
Yeah, like immediately anxiety rips through your body, and anxiety is serving a purpose. It's sounding the alarm so that you stop talking to me and you pay attention. And all of a sudden your brain takes over, you swerve without even thinking about it, and your heart races, and all the blood runs to your major organs so that you can go into a state of hyperfocus. The reason why people feel nervous or anxious or excited before a test or before a speech is because you're going into a state of hyperfocus. Anxiety, that feeling in your body, is now making you align with what you're about to do so you can focus on it and perform. In the example that I just gave you, anxiety served a purpose. And here's what's interesting. As the truck pulls away and you kind of pull back into your lane, what happens in your body now that the truck is gone and we're driving down the road safely?
In my body or my wife's body?
In your body.
Well, in my body, I would, that anxiety probably stays for a little while, not for an hour, but probably, 45 seconds or so as I begin to calm down and kind of put it into context, and we're safe, we're alive, it's not going to happen again probably immediately. So I probably recover pretty quickly, but there's a lingering effect.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right about the 45 seconds, because it is less than 90 seconds that most people switch from one emotional state to the other when there's intellectual context. So your body starts to slow down and it goes from the on-edge state, alert state, into what's called the parasympathetic state, which is your kind of rest and relax state, in about 90 seconds, because your brain sees the truck leave and your brain goes, oh, no threat. The problem for people today, and this is true of everybody on your team, is that we have been living in a heightened state of uncertainty. And every single person on the planet, their nervous system right now is either flipped into the fight or flight mode of feeling on edge, or it's like a trigger, immediately flips into it. And so the normal things that somebody wouldn't stress out, they're super stressed out. And this is important to understand, because I want you to, as a leader, to think about, first, let's talk about work. Assume that most people are at the end of their rope. They're trying the best that they can. They are burning the candle at both ends. They're having a hard time focusing and concentrating. And they're feeling uncertain and on edge. Because even if their work life is good, there's something going on with their kids at college. There's something going on with their kids in the high school. There's something going on with somebody in their family. And, the spike in this sense of anxiety, the spike that we're seeing in terms of people's mental health, is extraordinary. And I'm sure you're hearing the same thing from corporations that I'm hearing, which is that the number one concern that people have right now at the highest level in every single company, whether they're publicly traded or they're a small family business, is the well-being of their employees. And so one thing that you can do is, number one, you can encourage people to take time off. Number two, you can consciously, as a leader, make a strategic and intentional decision to move out of the mode that your company has been in for probably 2 years, because there are 3 phases to this pandemic that has impacted every corporation on the planet and every leader on the planet. Phase number 1 was life as it used to be, right? Because when the pandemic first hit, it was sort of like, oh my gosh, what's changing about life as it used to be? What life as it used to be? We're going to go back to the way life used to be. Phase number 2 was full-on crisis. Oh my gosh, we're in this. Yeah. And what you saw is an anxiety response from every single company on the planet, because we had to. Everything got turned upside down. The rules got rewritten overnight. Everybody had to pivot and to innovate and to switch and to innovate. Like, it was incredible. And there was so much amazingness that came out of it. There's going to be, when we look back on this period, this is going to be one of the most rapid periods of innovation and disruption in a very positive way when it comes to business operations, the way that people work, like all kinds of stuff. But one of the disruptions that has been horrible for people is that companies immediately jumped to nonstop video conference calls. And what has happened for human beings who are working hybrid or working remote is that people feel like they need to always be online. And there are lots of companies that also still have a policy 2 years later that your camera is required to be on. This is a horrible thing to be doing to people. And the reason why it's a horrible thing to be doing to people is, number one, it communicates mistrust, which makes somebody who's already stressed out feel even worse. But number two, based on the brain science, here's what we know. If you're on a video conference call and you're staring at yourself, having to stare at yourself activates this part of your brain, Scott. When the prefrontal cortex is engaged, the rate at which you drain the fuel in your brain increases dramatically. The reason why it is so difficult for everybody to be productive right now, for everybody to focus, the reason why people feel more anxious, the reason why people feel more distracted, the reason why people feel like, my gosh, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon and I feel like I need 3 martinis and a nap. Like I have 4 more hours for the rest of the day or 10. The reason is because you are having to work in an environment that is triggering stress and anxiety and being on edge. Staring at yourself all day on camera is draining the fuel in your brain. And companies reacted so like panic mode that they haven't pulled back yet and stepped into phase 3 of the pandemic, which is, this is the new reality. Let's stop pretending there is some sort of milestone that is out in the future that's going to solve all this. And let's get strategic and let's get intentional about how we're going to work, because everything in the company can't be important or else nothing is. And every meeting can't be 50 people on a Zoom call because nobody can get work done. And we need to go back to getting intentional and strategic about what's important and going back to the basics of making sure people's weekly jobs are aligned with what matters. And we need to allow people and trust them to get their work done. That's one thing that you can do as a leader. Less Zoom calls, more appreciation, and cameras off. That's going to help people a ton when it comes to anxiety at work. The other thing that will help people a ton is triple down on appreciation. What I've figured out in researching the high five habit and having 145,000 people from 91 countries go through a 5-day online challenge that I led about the high five habit. In 5 days, Scott, not a single person reported that this high five habit didn't work. And what I've learned in researching the power of appreciation and developing habits of encouragement is that the most motivating force on the planet is to feel appreciated, to feel like somebody sees you and hears you and actually appreciates you. And I know that you talk about this a lot. People, and we're talking about the Great Resignation, right? And companies make the mistake of thinking that people are leaving organizations because they're looking for better compensation. That's not true. People leave organizations. There was a huge McKinsey study that proved this recently. They leave organizations because they don't feel valued or appreciated, and they don't feel like they belong. And so this should be a giant red flag for every leader out there. You've got the Great Resignation. You've got people really starting to think about what they value and what matters to them. You've got a hybrid work environment where it's going to take more intentionality to make people feel like they belong and to make sure that they feel appreciated. And so you've got to make sure that this is priority number one as you head into this next year, that the focus is on how do I make sure that people's work is getting recognized, that people feel visible, and that I am pointing out all the things they're doing right instead of harping on the thing that they're doing wrong. That is something that you can do that goes way beyond the corporate programs that people put in place. It's the basic blocking and tackling of making sure that everybody that reports to you feels appreciated by you. And it takes work. It takes a lot of work to build that as a muscle as a leader. Hey, it's Mel. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed that video, by God, please subscribe because I don't want you to miss a thing. Thank you so much for being here. We've got so much amazing stuff coming. Thank you so much for sending this stuff to your friends and your family. I love you. We create these videos for you. So make sure you subscribe. Mwah.